The gunshot that rang through Stella Norton's small homestead at dawn wasn't what woke her. It was the sound of Daisy lowing in terror that sent her scrambling from her bed in nothing but her cotton nightdress and boots. She burst through the door of her cabin with her father's old rifle clutched in trembling hands, her honey blonde hair streaming wild down her back, just in time to see 3 men on horseback dragging her milk cow by a rope toward the tree line. The early June morning of 1882 was already warming in Florissant, Colorado, and the pine-scented air carried their rough laughter back to her as clearly as if they stood beside her. "Stop! That's my cow." Stella's voice cracked with fury and desperation as she raised the rifle, but her hands shook too badly to aim properly. She had never shot at a person before, never even considered it until this moment when everything she had left in this world was being stolen right before her eyes. One of the men turned in his saddle, a heavy-set brute with a thick black beard, and he had the audacity to tip his hat at her mockingly. "Pretty little thing like you don't need a cow, sweetheart. These hills belong to the Garrett Ranch now and everything on them. You best pack up and move along before we come back for more." The threat hung in the air like smoke as they disappeared into the ponderosa pines, and Stella stood there shaking, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. Daisy's plaintive cries grew fainter and fainter, until the forest swallowed them completely. She lowered the rifle and sank to her knees in the dirt of her yard, her chest heaving with sobs she had been holding back for the 6 months since her father died and left her alone on this 40-acre homestead. Without Daisy, she would have no milk to sell in town, no butter to trade, no cheese to keep her fed through the coming winter. That cow represented the difference between survival and starvation, between keeping her father's land and losing everything he had worked for. The Garrett Ranch had been buying up small homesteads throughout the valley for 2 years now, using intimidation and violence when money didn't work, and Stella had refused to sell no matter how many times their men came around. She had thought her stubborn determination would be enough, but she had been wrong. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to go back inside and dress properly in her worn brown skirt and white blouse, forced herself to think clearly despite the panic clawing at her throat. She needed help, but there was no one to ask. The few other small homesteaders in the area had already been driven out or bought out, and the sheriff in Florissant was known to look the other way when the Garrett Ranch was involved. Her nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and by the time she walked there and back, Daisy would be long gone, probably already butchered or sold. Stella was hitching up her stubborn old mule to the cart, preparing to ride into town anyway because she had no other options, when she heard hoofbeats coming up the road. Her heart lurched with fear that the Garrett men had returned, and she grabbed the rifle again, positioning herself behind the water trough for cover. But the rider who emerged from the morning shadows was alone, tall in the saddle atop a dusty buckskin horse, and he had his hands raised peacefully when he saw her weapon pointed in his direction. "Easy there, miss. I'm not here to cause trouble." He was younger than she expected, probably only a few years older than her own 22 years, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty from hard travel, his face lean and angular with several days of stubble shadowing his jaw, and his dark eyes were cautious, but kind as they met hers over the barrel of her rifle. "State your business," Stella said, trying to keep her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. "If you're with the Garrett Ranch, you can turn right back around." "I'm not with anyone but myself," the stranger said, his voice low and calm. "Name's Quincy Zane. I've been riding through looking for work, and I saw 3 men driving a milk cow through the forest about a mile back. Seemed odd, seeing as how they were treating her rough, and she was calling out like she knew she was supposed to be somewhere else. Then I heard a shot earlier and figured maybe something wasn't right. This your place? Something in Stella's chest loosened slightly, just enough for her to breathe again. They stole my cow, about an hour ago. They work for the Garrett Ranch and they want my land. She lowered the rifle slowly, studying his face for any sign of deception. You said you saw them, Quincy nodded, his eyes darkening with something that looked like anger. I did, heading northeast, moving slow because the cow was fighting them. If we move fast, we might be able to catch up before they reach wherever they're taking her. Stella's eyebrows rose. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and she could see he was tall, maybe 6 feet, with the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living with his hands and his strength. Because stealing a man's livelihood, or a woman's, is about the lowest thing a person can do. And because those types of men don't stop with one cow, they'll be back. He met her eyes squarely. I've got nothing pressing to get to, and I don't much care for bullies. So if you're willing to show me which direction they went, I'll get your cow back. Stella stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect from men. But all she saw was honest determination and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he understood exactly what it felt like to have everything stripped away by people with more power. She made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. Daisy knows me. She'll come easier if I'm there. Quincy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have told him it would be pointless. He gave a short nod. Can you ride? Better than most men, Stella said, already moving toward the small stable where her father's old horse, Chester, spent most of his time eating and sleeping. Give me 2 minutes. It took her less than that to saddle Chester and shove some strips of dried beef and a canteen into a saddlebag. She changed into her riding skirt, the divided one her father had made for her that shocked the church ladies in town, and tied her hair back with a leather cord. When she emerged, Quincy was checking his own supplies and the rifle that hung from his saddle. He looked up as she mounted, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. You handle a horse well, he said simply, and there was respect in his voice that made her stand a little straighter in the saddle. My father taught me everything about working this land, Stella said, guiding Chester alongside Quincy's buckskin. I'm not going to lose it without a fight. They rode hard into the forest, following the trail the Garrett men had left. Quincy moved like someone who had spent his entire life reading signs in the wilderness, pointing out broken branches and disturbed pine needles that Stella would never have noticed. He didn't talk much as they rode, but she found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the confident way he sat his horse, the careful way his eyes scanned their surroundings. You said you were looking for work, Stella said after they had been riding for nearly an hour. What kind of work? Ranch work, mostly, Quincy said, his eyes still fixed on the trail. I'm good with cattle and horses, can mend fences and fix buildings. I've been drifting since my family's ranch in Texas was foreclosed on 2 years back. Bank wanted the land more than they wanted to work with us through a bad year. His jaw tightened. So I understand what it's like to watch someone take what you've built. I'm sorry, Stella said softly and meant it. She knew that pain intimately, the feeling of watching your world crumble while you stood helpless to stop it. Is that why you're helping me? Because you know what it's like? Quincy was quiet for a moment, and when he finally looked at her, there was something raw and honest in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. Partly. but also because when I saw you standing there with that rifle, ready to fight for what's yours even though you were outnumbered and outgunned, I thought you were about the bravest person I'd seen in a long time. Reminded me that there are still things worth fighting for. Heat crept up Stella's neck that had nothing to do with the warming June sun filtering through the pine branches above them. She looked away quickly, focusing on the trail ahead. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Courage isn't about not being scared, Quincy said quietly. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're scared out of your mind. Before Stella could respond, Quincy held up his hand sharply, bringing his horse to a stop. She halted Chester immediately, her heart jumping into her throat. Ahead, through a break in the trees, she could see a small clearing with a rough log structure that looked like a lined shack or hunting cabin. Smoke rose from a chimney, and 3 horses were tied outside. And there, in a makeshift pen beside the cabin, was Daisy, still lowing unhappily. "That's her," Stella breathed, relief and anger flooding through her in equal measure. "That's my cow." "Stay here," Quincy said, already dismounting and pulling his rifle free. "Let me handle this." "Absolutely not," Stella said, sliding from Chester's back before Quincy could stop her. "She's my cow and this is my fight. I'm not hiding in the trees while you risk your neck for me." Quincy looked like he wanted to argue, but again, something in her face stopped him. His expression softened slightly. "You're stubborn, you know that." "I've been told," Stella said, checking her own rifle. Her hands were steadier now, anger giving her courage. "What's the plan?" "We walk in calm and reasonable," Quincy said, his voice low. "We tell them we're here for your cow and we ask them nicely to hand her over. We give them a chance to do the right thing. And if they don't," Quincy's expression hardened, "then we make it clear that taking her isn't an option anymore." They moved through the trees together, keeping low and quiet until they reached the edge of the clearing. Stella could hear rough voices from inside the cabin, the sound of men laughing and drinking even though it was barely mid-morning. Her anger burned hotter. These men had terrorized her, stolen from her, threatened her home, and now they were celebrating their cruelty like it was a joke. Quincy looked at her one more time, a question in his eyes, and she nodded firmly. Together they stepped into the clearing. "Good morning, gentlemen," Quincy called out, his voice carrying clearly across the open space. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The door to the cabin burst open and all 3 men stumbled out, hands reaching for their guns when they saw Quincy and Stella standing there with rifles pointed steadily in their direction. The heavy-set man with the black beard, the one who had mocked Stella that morning, narrowed his eyes when he recognized her. Well, the little homesteader brought her boyfriend. That's real sweet." He didn't draw his gun, but his hand stayed near his holster. "You 2 best turn around and head home before this gets ugly." "We're here for the cow," Quincy said calmly, but there was steel beneath his words. "The lady's cow that you stole from her property this morning. We're going to take her back now, and you're going to let us do it without any trouble." One of the other men, tall and skinny with a scar across his cheek, laughed meanly. "Is that so? 3 of us and 2 of you, one being a little girl. I don't think the math works in your favor, friend." "The math works fine," Quincy said, and his voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Because I'm a very good shot, and I'm betting I can put 2 of you down before you clear leather. The lady here, she might be small, but she's got motivation, and a motivated person with a gun is someone you don't want to underestimate. So here's how this is going to go. You're going to open that pen, we're going to take the cow, and everyone gets to walk away from this. Or we can do it the hard way and somebody's going to get hurt. Your choice." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Stella kept her rifle trained on the black-bearded man, her finger near the trigger, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She tried to channel her father's steadiness, his calm in the face of danger, but all she could feel was the trembling in her legs and the fear that this was about to go very wrong. The third man, shorter and broader with mean little eyes, spat into the dirt. Garrett's going to hear about this. He doesn't like people interfering with his business. Then Garrett can come talk to me himself, Quincy said. But the cow goes back to its rightful owner today. Now move aside. For a moment, Stella thought they were going to draw their guns anyway, thought this was going to end in blood and gunfire and death. But something in Quincy's expression, some cold certainty that said he had done this before and would do it again without hesitation, made the black-bearded man step back slowly, hands moving away from his gun. Fine. Take the damned cow. But this isn't over, girl. Garrett wants that land, and he's going to get it one way or another. We'll see about that, Stella said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Now open the pen. The skinny man with the scar moved slowly to the pen and opened the gate. Daisy, recognizing Stella's voice, came trotting out immediately, still clearly agitated but unhurt. Relief flooded through Stella so intensely it made her dizzy. Go get her, Quincy said softly, not taking his eyes or his rifle off the three men. I've got them covered. Stella moved quickly to Daisy, running her hands over the cow's familiar hide, checking for injuries. It's all right, girl. It's all right. We're going home. She grabbed the rope still tied around Daisy's neck and began backing toward the trees, keeping herself between the cow and the Garrett men. Quincy began backing up as well, his rifle never wavering. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I suggest you tell your boss that the Norton homestead is off limits from now on. Anyone who comes onto that property without an invitation is going to have to answer to me. And who the hell are you supposed to be? The black-bearded man snarled. Just someone who doesn't like seeing women terrorized by cowards, Quincy said coldly. Spread the word. They made it back to the trees, and Quincy kept his gun trained on the cabin until they were deep enough into the forest that the men couldn't follow without being seen. Only then did he lower his rifle and turn to Stella, and the concern in his eyes made something warm bloom in her chest despite the fear still coursing through her veins. Are you all right? He asked, moving close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped his rifle like he was fighting the urge to go back and finish what they had started. I'm fine, Stella said, and then, to her absolute mortification, she started crying. Not delicate tears, but great heaving sobs of relief and delayed terror and overwhelming gratitude. I'm sorry. I don't usually cry, it's just, I thought I'd lost her. I thought I'd lost everything. She didn't even realize Quincy had moved until she felt his arms around her, strong and steady and safe. He held her carefully like she was something precious that might break, one hand coming up to rest against her hair. It's all right. You're safe now. We got her back. Stella let herself lean into him for just a moment. Let herself take comfort in the solid warmth of another human being who wasn't trying to hurt her or take from her. He smelled like leather and horse and pine smoke, and his heartbeat was steady beneath her ear where her head rested against his chest. She couldn't remember the last time someone had held her like this, like she mattered, like her fear and her pain were important. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her tears, Quincy's expression was so gentle it made her chest ache. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the touch feather light and careful. Thank you, Stella whispered. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. I can't ever repay you for this. You don't need to repay me, Quincy said, and there was something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch, something intense and real. But those men were right about one thing. They're going to come back, or Garrett's going to send others. You can't stay out there alone, not now that you've defied them. I don't have anywhere else to go, Stella said, despair creeping into her voice. This is my home. My father built that cabin with his own hands. He's buried on that land. I can't just leave. Quincy was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to solve a complicated problem. Then he seemed to come to a decision. Then I'll stay. For a while, at least. Until things settle down or until Garrett gets the message that you're not alone anymore. Stella stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You do that. Stay and help me. You don't even know me. I know you're brave and stubborn and you love your land enough to fight for it, Quincy said simply. I know you stood up to 3 armed men for your cow. I know you didn't back down even when you were terrified. That's enough for me. He paused, then added more softly, and I know what it's like to lose everything. If I can help you keep what's yours, maybe that means something got saved, even if my own place couldn't be. They started the journey back to the homestead, moving slowly to accommodate Daisy's pace. The morning had warmed into a beautiful June day, the sky impossibly blue above the pine trees, and Stella found herself acutely aware of Quincy riding beside her. He sat easy in the saddle, comfortable in his own skin in a way that made her feel somehow steadier herself. Tell me about your family's ranch, Stella said after a while, wanting to know more about this mysterious stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. In Texas, Quincy's expression grew distant but not closed off. It was a small place. My father built it up from nothing, just like your father did. We ran cattle, had a good water source, made enough to get by. But then we had 2 bad years in a row, drought and disease, and the bank wouldn't extend our loan. My father died trying to save it, worked himself into an early grave. My mother and sister moved to San Antonio to live with my aunt after we lost the land. I couldn't stay there, couldn't watch someone else living in our house, running cattle on our range. So I left. Been drifting for 2 years now, taking work where I can find it. You miss them. Your mother and sister. Every day, Quincy admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice made Stella's heart squeeze. But they're better off where they are. My sister got married last year to a good man, a shopkeeper. They're building a life in the city. That's not for me, though. I'm a ranch hand, a cowboy. I need open space and honest work. I just haven't found a place that feels like home again since we lost ours. I understand that, Stella said softly. After my father died, I couldn't imagine leaving. This place is all I have left of him. Every fence post, every tree he planted, every stone in that cabin wall, it's like he's still here somehow. Does that sound foolish? No, Quincy said, looking at her with such understanding that she felt tears prick her eyes again. It doesn't sound foolish at all. It sounds like love. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Stella found herself thinking about what it would mean to have Quincy stay on her land, to have help with the endless work that kept her exhausted from dawn to dusk. But more than that, she thought about what it would mean to have another person there, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to share meals with, someone to make the loneliness a little less crushing. When they finally reached the homestead, the sun was high overhead and the day had grown genuinely warm. Stella led Daisy back to her pen, checking her over thoroughly and giving her extra feed as an apology for the morning's terror. Quincy tended to the horses, moving around her small stable with practiced efficiency, and she found herself watching the way he worked, the careful attention he paid to every detail. "You're hungry," Stella said when they finally finished the chores. It wasn't a question. "Come inside." "It's the least I can do." Her cabin was small but tidy, one main room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner, a table and chairs her father had made, shelves lined with her mother's few precious dishes. Quincy had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and he seemed to fill the space with his presence in a way that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. Stella moved around the kitchen area, pulling out bread she had baked 2 days ago, cheese, dried venison, the last of her precious coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, awareness of Quincy's eyes on her making her self-conscious. She wasn't used to having anyone in her space, especially not a man, who looked at her like she was someone worth looking at. "You don't have to go to trouble," Quincy said, but he sat at the table when she gestured to a chair, removing his hat and setting it carefully beside him. His dark hair was mussed where the hat had pressed it down, and there was dust on his clothes from the hard ride. "It's not trouble," Stella said, setting food on the table between them. "You saved Daisy. You saved my livelihood. This is nothing compared to that." They ate in silence at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Stella found herself studying Quincy when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands, scarred and calloused from hard work, handled everything with surprising gentleness. He caught her looking once and gave her a small smile that made warmth spread through her chest. "So if you're going to stay for a while," Stella said, trying to sound practical and businesslike even though her heart was doing strange things, "I should tell you what needs doing. The south fence needs mending, there's a leak in the stable roof, and the garden needs weeding. I've been trying to keep up with everything myself, but there's always more work than hours in the day." "I'll start with the fence this afternoon," Quincy said. "And we should probably set up some kind of early warning system, something that will let you know if anyone's approaching the property. Those Garrett men might be back sooner than we'd like. There's a bell my father hung in that big pine tree near the road," Stella said. "If we attach a rope to it, we could rig it so it rings if someone trips the wire." Quincy nodded approvingly. "That's smart thinking. We'll set that up first, then I'll work on the fence. Where should I bed down? I saw a hayloft in the stable." "That's not necessary," Stella said quickly, then felt heat rise to her face at the implication. "I mean, there's a small bunkhouse behind the cabin. It's not much, just one room with a stove and a bed, but my father built it for the hired hand he had before. Well, before we couldn't afford help anymore. You'd be more comfortable there than in the hayloft." Something flickered in Quincy's eyes, something that might have been relief or gratitude or something else she couldn't quite name. "That would be appreciated, thank you." They spent the afternoon working side by side, setting up the warning system and then moving on to mend the fence. Stella found herself watching the way Quincy moved, efficient and skilled, his hands sure as he worked the wire and wood. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind, asking her opinion about how things should be done, treating her like a partner rather than someone to be protected or managed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when they finally finished for the day. Stella's muscles ached from the hard work, but it was a good ache, the ache of accomplishment. She showed Quincy to the bunkhouse, which she had cleaned out that afternoon while he worked, making sure there were fresh linens on the bed and wood stocked for the small stove. "This is perfect," Quincy said, looking around the simple room with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Stella." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his low, warm voice did something to her insides that she wasn't quite prepared for. "You're welcome, Quincy. I'll call you for breakfast in the morning." She turned to leave, suddenly feeling shy and uncertain, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Stella, what you did today, standing up to those men, getting your cow back, your father would have been proud of you." Stella's throat tightened with emotion. She looked back at him, backlit by the last rays of the setting sun, and managed a small smile. "Thank you. That means more than you know. That night, lying in her bed in the cabin, Stella found it hard to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day. The terror of the morning, the relief of getting Daisy back, the feel of Quincy's arms around her when she had cried, the way he looked at her like she was someone capable and strong. She had spent 6 months alone, fighting to keep her head above water, and now suddenly there was someone else here, someone willing to help, someone who seemed to understand her in a way no one had since her father died. It was dangerous, she knew, letting herself rely on him. He had said he would stay for a while, but not forever. Eventually he would drift on, looking for his next job, his next place, and she would be alone again. She couldn't let herself get used to his presence, couldn't let herself start to depend on him. But even as she thought it, she knew it was already too late. Something had shifted today, something fundamental, and she didn't know how to shift it back. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm that Stella hadn't expected. Quincy proved himself invaluable around the homestead, tackling the endless list of repairs and improvements with steady determination. He fixed the stable roof, mended all the fences, dug out and cleared the irrigation ditch that had been clogged for months. He was up before dawn every morning, and Stella found herself rising earlier just to cook breakfast for both of them, enjoying the quiet conversation over coffee as the sun rose over the mountains. They worked side by side during the days, and Stella was surprised by how easy it was to be around him. Quincy didn't fill every silence with chatter, seemed comfortable with quiet, but when he did talk, she found herself hanging on every word. He told her stories about his time drifting, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. She told him about her childhood on the homestead, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's dreams for the land. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and Stella found those moments becoming precious to her. Quincy would sometimes play a harmonica he kept in his saddlebag, simple melodies that floated on the cool evening air, and she would sit with her mending or her knitting and feel more content than she had in years. But the threat of the Garrett Ranch hung over everything like a dark cloud. 3 times in those first weeks, they saw riders on the road near the property, watching but not approaching. The warning bell they had set up never rang, but Stella knew it was only a matter of time before someone came. Quincy started teaching her to shoot properly, spending evenings working with her until she could hit a target consistently. His hands gentle but firm as he showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "You're a natural," he said one evening after she had hit the target 4 times in a row. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me a lot of things," Stella said, lowering the rifle, "but he never taught me how to protect this place after he was gone. He thought he had more time, I think." "We both did." Quincy moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "You're doing better than you know. Most people would have given up by now, would have sold to Garrett and moved on. But you're still here, still fighting. That takes real strength." Stella looked up at him, at the sincerity in his dark eyes, and felt her breath catch. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the exact shade of brown his eyes were, flecked with gold in the last light of the setting sun. Close enough that if she just leaned forward slightly, she could find out what it would feel like to kiss him. The thought shocked her enough that she stepped back quickly, heat flooding her face. "I should get dinner started. You must be hungry." If Quincy noticed her sudden awkwardness, he didn't mention it. But she caught him looking at her differently after that, his gaze lingering on her face when he thought she wasn't watching, and she wondered if he had felt it too, that moment of connection that had felt like something shifting into place. It was a Tuesday in early July when everything changed. Stella was in the garden, harvesting early lettuce and radishes, when she heard hoofbeats coming up the road. Not the slow pace of a neighbor or a casual traveler, but the hard, fast rhythm of multiple horses moving with purpose. Her heart jumped into her throat and she ran for the cabin, grabbing her rifle from where it leaned beside the door. Quincy emerged from the stable at the same moment, his own rifle in hand, his face set in grim lines. "Get inside and bar the door," he said, moving to position himself between the approaching riders and the cabin. "I'm not hiding," Stella said, taking up a position beside him. "This is my land. I face this with you." He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. 6 riders came into view, and at their head was a man Stella recognized even though she had only seen him a handful of times. Marcus Garrett himself, the owner of the Garrett Ranch, a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed everything like property to be acquired. The riders spread out in a semicircle, and Garrett sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. His gaze passed over Quincy dismissively before settling on Stella, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "Miss Norton," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, at odds with the rough men who surrounded him. "I've been hoping to have a word with you, but I understand you've been keeping violent company. My men tell me they were assaulted while conducting legitimate business on open-range land." "Your men stole my cow from my property," Stella said, her voice clear and strong despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And this gentleman helped me retrieve my stolen property. That's not violence, that's justice." Garrett's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "I see. Well, Miss Norton, I've come to make you one final offer for your land. $500, cash money, more than generous for 40 acres of rock and trees with barely enough water to keep one cow alive. You can take the money and start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safe." "My answer is the same as it's always been," Stella said. "This land is not for sale." "That's unfortunate," Garrett said, and now the smile was gone entirely. "Because the thing is, Miss Norton, I own everything else in this valley. Your little homestead is right in the middle of my range, blocking access to the summer grazing in the high country. It's inconvenient, and I don't like inconveniences." "That sounds like a personal problem," Quincy said, and his voice was so cold it made Stella shiver. "The lady said her land isn't for sale. That's the end of the discussion." Garrett's eyes finally focused on Quincy, really looked at him, and something changed in his expression. "And who exactly are you? Some drifting cowboy playing at being a hero?" "I'm someone who's going to make sure Miss Norton and her property are left alone," Quincy said. "I'm also someone who knows the land office in Denver would be very interested to hear about some of the methods you've been using to acquire property. Theft, intimidation, threatening a woman living alone. Those are serious crimes, Mr. Garrett." The air crackled with tension. Garrett's men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns, and Stella tightened her grip on her rifle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Is that a threat?" Garrett asked softly, dangerously. "It's a promise," Quincy said. "You leave Miss Norton alone, you stay off her property, and we all go about our business peacefully. You keep pushing, and I'll make sure everyone from here to Denver knows exactly what kind of man you are. I doubt your business partners and fancy friends in the city would be too pleased to learn you've been terrorizing women and stealing livestock." For a long moment, Garrett just stared at Quincy, and Stella could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing options, assessing risks. Finally, he smiled again, but it was a cruel expression. "You're making a very big mistake, Cowboy. Both of you are. This valley isn't big enough for people who don't want to cooperate with me." "Then I guess you'll have to learn to live with being inconvenienced," Stella said, surprised by her own boldness. "Because I'm not leaving, and neither is he." Garrett's expression darkened further, but he pulled his horse around sharply. "We'll see about that. Enjoy your little homestead while you still have it, Miss Norton. These mountains can be dangerous places. Accidents happen all the time." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Stella's legs nearly gave out from relief and delayed fear. Quincy's hand was suddenly at her elbow, steadying her, and she leaned into his strength gratefully. "That was incredibly dangerous," Quincy said quietly. "You shouldn't have stood up to him like that. He's the kind of man who doesn't forget a slight." "I couldn't let him think he'd won," Stella said, looking up at him. "And I wasn't alone. You were right there with me." Something in Quincy's expression softened, and his hand on her elbow tightened slightly. "I'll always be right there with you as long as you'll have me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that went beyond just protection from Garrett's threats. Stella found herself unable to look away from his eyes, from the intensity she saw there, the promise of something she was almost afraid to name. "Quincy," she whispered, not even sure what she was asking for. He moved closer, one hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong. Tell me I'm imagining that you feel this too, and I'll step back. I'll keep my distance." "But Stella, these past weeks with you, they've been. I haven't felt like I belonged somewhere in 2 years, not since I lost my family's ranch. But here, with you, I feel like maybe I've found something worth staying for." "You're not imagining it," Stella breathed, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. "I feel it too. I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself because I know you'll leave eventually, but I can't help it. When you're near me, everything feels less impossible. Everything feels like it might actually be all right." Quincy's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "What if I didn't leave? What if I stayed not just to protect you from Garrett, but because this is where I want to be? What if we built something together, made this homestead into everything your father dreamed it could be?" "Do you mean that?" Stella asked, hardly daring to hope. "You'd really want to stay here with me?" Instead of answering with words, Quincy leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and kissed her. It was soft and careful and full of promise, his lips warm against hers, his hand cradling her face like she was something infinitely precious. Stella's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself sink into the kiss, into the feeling of being cherished and wanted, into the realization that this complicated, wonderful man had somehow become essential to her happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I mean every word. I want to stay. I want to help you fight for this place. I want to build a life here with you if you'll have me." "Yes," Stella said, smiling through the tears that were streaming down her face now. "Yes, I want that too. I want all of it." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, and Stella felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Hope for the future. Real, solid hope that she wouldn't have to face everything alone anymore. But the threat from Garrett wasn't over, and they both knew it. Over the next few weeks, things escalated in frightening ways. Twice they found their fence cut during the night. Once they discovered someone had tried to poison the water in Daisy's trough, but Quincy had caught it in time. The harassment was constant and wearing, designed to break their spirits and make them give up. "We need to get proof," Quincy said one evening as they sat on the porch, his arm around Stella's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Something concrete that ties Garrett to these acts. Then we take it to the authorities in Denver, go over the local sheriff's head." "How do we do that?" Stella asked, though she was distracted by the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, by the solid warmth of him beside her. "We catch them in the act," Quincy said grimly. "We set up a watch, take turns staying awake, and the next time they come, we get close enough to identify them and get testimony that will hold up." It was a dangerous plan, but they didn't have many other options. They started taking shifts through the night, one sleeping while the other kept watch with a rifle and a pair of binoculars Stella's father had used for hunting. It was exhausting work on top of all the regular chores of keeping the homestead running, but they managed, supporting each other through the long nights and difficult days. Stella found herself falling more deeply in love with Quincy with each passing day. She loved the way he was gentle with Daisy and the horses, the way he always asked her opinion about decisions regarding the land, the way he held her at night when the fear got too overwhelming. They had started spending evenings together in the cabin, propriety be damned, because neither of them wanted to be alone. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing dreams and memories. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, her mending while he worked on tack repairs, like an old married couple. He kissed her often now, slow, sweet kisses that made her feel cherished, and sometimes deeper, more passionate kisses that lit a fire in her blood and made her think about a future that included more than just shared work and companionship. They hadn't crossed that final line yet, both of them holding back out of respect and caution, but Stella knew it was only a matter of time. She wanted him with an intensity that sometimes shocked her, wanted to belong to him completely and have him belong to her. It was a moonless night in late July when their vigilance finally paid off. Stella was on watch, sitting in the darkness near the stable with her rifle across her knees, when she saw movement near the fence line. 3 figures, moving quietly, carrying torches. Her heart jumped into her throat and she ran as quietly as she could to the bunkhouse, shaking Quincy awake. He was alert instantly, years of cowboy life having trained him to wake quickly. They moved together through the darkness, circling around to get closer to the intruders without being seen. As they crept nearer, Stella could make out the faces of the men in the flickering torchlight. 2 of them were the same Garrett men who had stolen Daisy. The third was a foreman she recognized from town, someone known to be Garrett's right hand. They were dousing the fence with something from a can, and the smell of kerosene carried on the night air. "They're going to burn us out," Stella breathed in horror. Quincy's expression was murderous in the faint starlight. He raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air, the crack of it echoing across the valley. "Don't move. All 3 of you, drop those torches and put your hands where I can see them." The men froze, caught red-handed, and the foreman had the intelligence to realize they were cornered. He dropped his torch carefully and raised his hands. The other 2 looked like they might run or fight, but Quincy worked the lever on his rifle, chambering another round, and the deadly calm in his stance made them think better of it. "Stella, go ring the bell," Quincy said, not taking his eyes off the 3 men. "Ring it hard and keep ringing it. I sent word to some of the other small homesteaders last week. If they're close enough, they'll come." Stella ran to the bell and pulled the rope over and over, the clanging sound carrying across the valley in the quiet night. And miraculously, incredibly, within 20 minutes, 3 other riders appeared, small homesteaders from surrounding properties, who had apparently been ready and waiting for a signal that they were needed. With witnesses present, including 2 men who were willing to ride to Denver immediately with testimony and evidence, the Garrett foreman finally broke. He admitted that Garrett had ordered the harassment, admitted to the theft and the attempted arson, trying to bargain for leniency by giving up his boss. It was more than enough to bring charges, more than enough to get the law involved at a level where Garrett's influence couldn't protect him. The local sheriff, faced with multiple witnesses and undeniable evidence, had no choice but to act. Within a week, Garrett was arrested and charged with multiple crimes. His ranch was placed under legal review, his assets frozen, and the empire he had built through intimidation and violence began to crumble. Many of the homesteaders he had forced out came forward with their own stories, building a case that would keep Garrett tied up in courts for years and likely result in prison time. The danger was over, and Stella could hardly believe it. The night after Garrett's arrest, she and Quincy stood on her porch, looking out over the land that was finally, truly safe, and she felt like she could breathe freely for the first time in months. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually did it. We saved the homestead." "You did it," Quincy corrected gently, pulling her close against his side. "You refused to give up, even when it would have been easier. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Stella Norton." She turned to face him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, don't you? You saved more than my cow that first day. You saved me." "Then we saved each other," Quincy said softly, his arms wrapping around her waist, "because I was lost before I found you. I'd been drifting, going through the motions, feeling like nothing mattered anymore. And then I met you standing there with your rifle, ready to fight the whole world for what was yours, and something in me woke up again. You gave me a reason to care, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that good things were still possible." Stella reached up and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, all the love and gratitude and hope and desire that had been building for weeks. Quincy responded with matching intensity, his arms tightening around her, lifting her slightly off her feet as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with emotion and want. "Marry me," he said roughly. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a couple of months, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me, Stella. Let me spend the rest of my life working this land with you, building something beautiful together. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," Stella said, tears streaming down her face again, but happy tears this time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Quincy. I think I've loved you since that first day when you offered to help a stranger for no reason except that it was the right thing to do." They were married in August in the small church in Florissant, with the few friends they had made among the other homesteaders attending. Stella wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Quincy wore new clothes he had bought especially for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with such tenderness and joy that she felt like her heart might burst. They spent their wedding night in the cabin that was now truly their home, and Quincy made love to her with a reverence and passion that left her breathless and amazed. He was gentle and patient, making sure she felt nothing but pleasure and love, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, Stella felt completely and utterly happy for the first time since her father had died. "I'm never leaving this place," Quincy murmured against her hair, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I'm never leaving you. This is home now. You're my home." "And you're mine," Stella whispered back, pressing a kiss to his chest. "We're going to build something amazing together, I know it." And they did. Over the next few years, they worked side by side to transform the small homestead into a thriving ranch. They expanded their herd, starting with a few head of cattle they bought with money saved from selling milk and butter and Stella's careful husbandry. Quincy's expertise with cattle and Stella's determination made them a formidable team. When the Garrett Ranch went up for auction to pay Garrett's legal debts, Quincy and Stella, along with several other small homesteaders, pooled their resources to buy portions of it, breaking up the massive holding into family-sized ranches. They acquired another 160 acres of prime grazing land with good water, and suddenly, their small homestead was a real ranch. Life wasn't always easy. They had hard winters and dry summers. They lost cattle to disease and predators. They worked from dawn to dusk most days and fell into bed exhausted. But they had each other, and that made everything worthwhile. Quincy was everything Stella had never known she needed. Partner, protector, best friend, and passionate lover all wrapped into one. In the spring of 1884, Stella discovered she was pregnant. She told Quincy on a beautiful April morning as they stood together looking out over their expanded herd, and the expression of pure joy on his face made her cry happy tears. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down carefully and knelt to kiss her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa, and I already love you more than anything in this world except your mama." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him Samuel, after Stella's father, and Quincy cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude for the family he had never thought he'd have. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny thing with blonde hair and her father's brown eyes. They named her Grace, because that was what she was, pure grace and beauty and blessing. Quincy was just as besotted with his daughter as he was with his son, and Stella often found him in the nursery at night, just watching their children sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he confessed to her one night as they lay in their bed, the bed they had bought together to replace the narrow one that was too small for two. "After we lost the ranch in Texas, after my father died, I thought that was it. I thought my chance at having a family and a home was gone. But then I found you and you gave me everything back. You gave me more than I ever dreamed possible." "We found each other," Stella corrected, snuggling closer to him, "and we built this together. That first day when you asked if you could help me get Daisy back, you changed my entire life. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me love when I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. You gave me a family and a future, and I thank God every day that you happened to be riding past my homestead that morning." "It wasn't chance," Quincy said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It was fate. It was destiny. I was meant to find you, and you were meant to be mine, and we were meant to build this life together." They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the wind whisper through the pines outside their window, and Stella thought about how different her life could have been. If the Garrett men hadn't stolen Daisy, if Quincy hadn't happened along at exactly the right moment, if she had given up and sold the homestead, where would she be now? Alone somewhere, struggling to survive, never knowing the joy of being loved by someone like Quincy, never knowing the profound happiness of holding her children in her arms. Over the years, their ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel and Grace grew into strong, capable children who loved the land as much as their parents did. Quincy proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children to ride and rope and respect the animals and the land. Stella watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, constantly amazed that this kind, strong, gentle man was hers. They had more children over the years. Another son they named Michael, and finally another daughter they named Hope. Their cabin was expanded into a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms and a big kitchen where Stella could cook for her growing family. The bunkhouse Quincy had first stayed in became home to the hired hands they eventually needed as the ranch grew too large for them to manage alone. The other small homesteaders in the valley became close friends, bound together by their shared struggle against Garrett and their determination to build good lives on their land. They helped each other through hard times, celebrated together during good times, and became a real community in a way that made the valley feel like home. Quincy occasionally received letters from his mother and sister in San Antonio, and he wrote back faithfully, sharing news of his wife and children and the successful ranch they had built. His mother visited once when Samuel was 5, and she told Stella with tears in her eyes that she had never seen her son so happy, so settled, so completely at peace with his life. "You've given him everything he lost," Quincy's mother said, holding Stella's hands in hers. "You've given him back his purpose and his hope. Thank you for loving my son the way he deserves to be loved." "He saved me first," Stella said simply, "and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that he did." As the years passed and Stella and Quincy grew older together, their love only deepened. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, had faced down threats and overcome obstacles, had built a legacy that would outlast them. When Stella looked at Quincy, even after years of marriage, she still felt that flutter in her chest, that warmth that spread through her entire body, that certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They would sometimes ride out together to the spot where Quincy had first helped her recover Daisy, and they would sit on their horses looking out over the valley that was now dotted with the ranches of people they loved, at the mountains that stood eternal and beautiful against the sky, at the land they had fought so hard to keep. "Do you ever regret it?" Stella asked him once during one of these rides. "Stopping that day, getting involved with a stranger's problems, staying when you could have kept drifting." Quincy turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of so much love it took her breath away even after all these years. "Not for a single second. That was the day my real life began. That was the day I found my home, my purpose, and the love of my life. Everything good I have came from that decision to stop and help you. So no, darling, I don't regret it. I thank God for it every single day." He reached over and took her hand, and they sat there on their horses, hands clasped, looking out over the life they had built together. And Stella knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what challenges might still come, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything since that fateful morning when a cowboy had appeared like an answer to a prayer and had stayed to become her whole world. Their children grew and eventually had children of their own, and Stella and Quincy became grandparents, a role they both treasured. They watched their grandchildren play in the yard where they had once stood facing down Garrett's men, and they told them stories about the early days, about how their grandmother had fought to keep this land, and how their grandfather had helped her save it. "Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever met," Quincy would tell the wide-eyed children gathered at his feet. "When I first saw her, she was standing there with a rifle, ready to take on 3 armed men all by herself to get her cow back. And I thought to myself, now there's a woman worth knowing. There's a woman worth fighting for. And your grandfather was the kindest person I ever met," Stella would add, smiling at her husband. "He helped a stranger for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. He stayed to protect me when he could have ridden on, and he loved me with his whole heart for all the years we've had together." As they grew elderly, their children insisted they slow down, let the younger generation handle more of the ranch work. But Stella and Quincy remained active, Quincy still riding out to check the herds even with his white hair and weathered face, Stella still tending her garden and cooking huge meals for the family gatherings they hosted regularly. On a summer evening much like the one when Quincy had first proposed, when they were both in their 70s and had been married for nearly 50 years, they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set. Their hands were clasped together, aged and spotted now but still strong, still connected. "I'd do it all again," Stella said softly, as if continuing a conversation they hadn't actually been having. "Every hard day, every scary moment, every challenge we faced. I'd do it all again just to have this life with you." "Me too," Quincy said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Meeting you was the greatest gift I ever received. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. And building this life with you, raising our children, creating this legacy, it's been more than I ever dreamed possible when I was a lost cowboy drifting through Colorado all those years ago." "We were both lost," Stella said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And then we found each other. And everything changed." "Everything changed," Quincy agreed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "For the better, for the absolute best." They sat there as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, the land they loved spreading out before them in all its wild beauty. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer, they could hear the laughter of their grandchildren playing, the voices of their children talking, the sounds of the large, loving family they had created together. It was a good life, a beautiful life, built on love and hard work and the courage to fight for what mattered. It was a life that started with a stolen cow and a cowboy willing to help, but it grew into something so much more, a partnership, a deep and abiding love, a family, a legacy. And as Stella sat there in Quincy's arms, in the home they had built together on the land they had fought to keep, she knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it, every fear overcome, every challenge met. Because all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this man who had become her everything. "I love you," she whispered, as she had whispered countless times over the decades they had been together. "I love you too," Quincy replied, as he had replied countless times, and would continue to reply until his last breath. "My brave, stubborn, beautiful Stella, I love you more than words can ever express." And there, on that porch, with the Colorado mountains standing eternal around them and the land they had built their life on spreading out in all directions, Stella and Quincy sat together in perfect contentment. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had created something truly extraordinary together. Their love story, which had begun with danger and theft and uncertainty, had grown into a lifetime of devotion, partnership, and joy that would be remembered by generations to come. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, one by one, like blessings being counted, and Stella thought about that young woman she had been all those years ago, terrified and alone, watching her cow being stolen and thinking her world was ending. If she could go back and tell that young woman what the future held, tell her about the wonderful man who would appear to help her, about the love they would share, about the family they would create and the life they would build, would that young woman even believe it? Probably not, Stella thought with a smile. But it had all happened anyway, every beautiful, impossible bit of it, and she wouldn't change a single thing.